the state of the running back position is in a sad place if you're a fan of running backs, because after Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing, Saquon finished 4th, and Tony Pollard finished 16th, mostly due to Zeke still getting a boatload of carries while obviously being a shell of himself. Neither of these players have gotten extended. All teams chose to not extend them, and they will be playing on the franchise tag. What I think is eye-opening about all this is that a team in the Cowboys who not too long ago paid Zeke, was it 6 years, $90 million?
Stupid bag.
Are refusing to pay a running back that, I mean, he's a Pro Bowl running back. Last year, he was a great running back. They're choosing not to pay a running back because, like all other 31 other NFL teams, they are realizing that paying running backs is a mistake. These are the highest running back contracts in recent history. CMC, 4 years, $64 million. Zeke, 6 years, $90 million. Le'Veon Bell, 4 years, $52.5 million. Todd Gurley, 4 years, $60 million. Dalvin Cook, 5 years, $63 million. Outside of CMC, who was traded, all of these running backs were cut during the duration of their deal. And the last 9 leading rushers for the Super Bowl winning team have made less than $2 million. I don't think this is an issue of inequality, like everybody's talking about how it's not fair that the running back position isn't being compensated. I think it's about supply and demand. The reason why quarterbacks get paid the most money is because the demand for them is high and the supply is very low for getting a top echelon guy. When it comes to running backs, they're a dime a dozen. You might have a demand for it, but the supply is so grand that you can find a 7th round pick in Pacheco and you don't need to pay Zeke $90 million over 6 years. You can find a great running back anywhere, and I think that's the issue we're running into right now. Should these great players get paid? They should. But I think right now it's an issue of maybe adjusting how many years they are under contract for their initial rookie deal, and also maybe just heavily incentivizing their contracts so if they hit certain milestones, they can be paid accordingly. But at this point, I do agree with the side that running backs are just the most replaceable position in football. And that's why we're seeing teams opt to not pay the Saquons of the world, the Josh Jacobs, or the Tony Pollards.
And not only are they replaceable, but you see the fall-offs these guys have, right? Some of it's not their fault. You look at a guy like Todd Gurley who had, degenerate knee and knee issues that caused his career to go from the best running back in football to 2 years later out of the league. Le'Veon Bell, whether it was scheme, fit, taking a year of football, he declined drastically. Zeke declined drastically. So I think a lot of these teams are seeing that what's the point of giving these guys this money that we know a year or two into the contract, they're going to fall off. And if you look at specifically these 3 guys who this season, Saquon, Pollard, Jacobs, all of these situations, for one, Saquon, this current front office, Joe Shane and Brian Dable, did not draft Saquon number 2 overall. That was Dave Gettleman who made that selection. There was, a lot of controversy around the time because they were thinking about even Darnold. I know there was quarterbacks available, but they went with Saquon, who was probably the most talented player in the draft, but everyone's saying it's a running back. Do you take them number 2 overall? So when Joe Shane came into here and he ran the show and he's the GM, he's kind of picking up the pieces of Dave Gettleman. He wasn't the one who selected Saquon Barkley. He wasn't the one who kind of had this weight on him to extend him, even though Saquon obviously improves this team. I don't think there's any fan out there who's going to look at the Giants and say they're going to be better off without Saquon Barkley. And I think it goes into the fact that when you have a quarterback who, Pacheco works on the Chiefs because you have Patrick Mahomes, right? If you put Pacheco on the Giants, I don't think he's giving you that same production and really opening up that offense that Saquon does. And when you pay Daniel Jones $40 million, you want that money to be worth it. So I think getting the most talent around him is the obvious thing to do. And when you hear reports saying that the Giants and Saquon were only $1 million or $2 million apart, it makes me wonder why they just didn't come to that agreement. Because we know the Giants, they're ready to win now. Whether we think they're contenders or not, you don't pay a quarterback $40 million and say we're rebuilding, right? So the fact that they didn't pay Saquon when there was that little of a disagreement was surprising to me. And for the other guys, Tony Pollard's coming off a broken leg, and he's never been a workhorse running back. So I'm not surprised the Cowboys are saying, let's give you a year, see what you do, and we could think about it down the road. And for Josh Jacobs, it's another Saquon situation where it's a different front office who didn't draft Josh Jacobs. So when you have a lot of these front offices and coaching staffs turn over year after year, it's hard to have that continuity because when you draft a guy in the first round, you're putting that stamp on them saying, this is my guy. I picked him. We think you could be a franchise cornerstone. But when a new front office comes in, they don't have that same attachment to players. So they don't feel obligated to pay them that big money. And like Joel said, you go through that list of all the running backs who got paid, CMC is really still the only one that's worth it. And that's because the Niners, number one, they're the ones paying them now, right? And not the Panthers, because the Panthers aren't ready to compete. Just like the Raiders with Josh Jacobs aren't ready to compete. The Niners looked at CMC. We had this debate when the trade went down that this might be the missing piece that gets us over the hump. This might be the piece that Jimmy G at the time needs to be able to, extend plays, pick up those first downs, convert third downs. So I think it's a mix of roster construction where if you're not competing like the Raiders, there's no sense to extend a running back, and also just the front office. And if you didn't draft the guy, there's not that same attachment level than if you were the GM who drafted him.
You want to go, Riv?
Yeah, I'll go. A lot of what Dehls says makes sense. I think it's really a case-by-case scenario because I think if you look at the teams that's won the Super Bowl, like the Eagles, the Niners, before CMC got there, they went to the Super Bowl. The Chiefs, they didn't really have a high-powered running back. They didn't have an elite running back. They had a committee, especially with the Eagles. Like, we have a committee of running backs that are just 6th-round picks, 5th-round picks, like underground running backs that we just slot in, slot out, and they do good work. Same thing with the Chiefs. They had a committee. Same thing with the Niners. They had Raheem Mostert. He wasn't no prime time name. They had a committee. Even other teams. Like, I think it's a case-by-case scenario, and although there is some elite running backs in the league and they deserve to get paid, you have to look at the situation like Dehls said. I think for the Giants, though, that's like a 50-50 thing because I feel like paying Daniel Jones $40 million but not paying the guy who really was the charge of your playoff push is kind of insane. I think if you want to stay competitive, you want to be a playoff team, Saquon earned the money rightfully so. Like, he was the reason you got to the playoffs. He was the reason you guys were competitive for the most part this year. He helped Daniel Jones. He's the guy who deservedly deserved that money. So he should have got paid, no questions asked. For these other guys, I get it. Like Josh Jacobs, the team isn't ready to compete. Do you want to put that money into him when you're not ready to compete? Tony Pollard has always been behind Zeke, so he's never been a full starting running back, and then he's coming off an injury. So running backs is honestly, you can replace them at any moment as long as you have an elite offensive line, you have a great quarterback. You can put a running back in that scheme that can do the little things, that can catch the ball, that can get 3 to 4 yards consistently. If you can just get a mid to good level running back, you can always fix that mistake. So unfortunately, that's just how the position is. I don't see how that's going to change outside of the few guys like CMC, who CMC got traded to a perfect situation, so he was able to make up for that money and be elite with the 49ers. Other running backs can't do that. We don't have APs of the world who can just single-handedly backpack an offense to the playoffs, go 2,000 yards. We don't have Derrick Henrys. There's few and rare running backs that can do that, and there's few and rare running backs that can earn that money.
This is a difficult topic for me because I've been so known to be pro running back and believing in the talent, and that does go and coincide with my love for fantasy football. However, taking that aside and trying to just talk about this strictly in the NFL sense, I understand where you guys are coming from, but we're talking about the number 1 leading rusher last year, number 4 leading rusher last season, and the 11th leading rusher last season, who was really one of the primary catalysts to the offense. All of them really were essential pieces. You probably look at Josh Jacobs, maybe Devontae Adams was the more essential piece to that offense. But number 1 in the league, you simply can't gloss over that. Saquon Barkley was the most important piece on that New York Giants offense. I can talk all that I want about Daniel Jones. Of course, he's the leader at the helm. He did a lot of his own that was great in terms of rushing the football also. But Saquon Barkley, of course, is number 1 that I look at on that offense. And then Tony Pollard. You have CeeDee Lamb. You have Dak Prescott. But the versatility that Tony Pollard provides you, on top of getting limited carries, to still be 11th in the league is a testament to how great Tony Pollard is. The Cowboys are learning from their past mistakes. And Ezekiel Elliott, I'm talking as someone who is one of my favorite football players that I've seen in my lifetime. And the fact that I can sit here and say that the Cowboys are learning from their mistakes because that contract had, for lack of a better term, burned them. Even though they're still a respectable team, they have one of the most talented rosters in the NFL. But in terms of how his production has diminished from season to season, that's where you look at it and say it burned them. So they're trying to learn from their past mistakes in terms of Tony Pollard. But Tony Pollard also is coming off an injury that we did see in the playoffs. So there could be a little caution there. Hey, prove it 1 year. Show me that you are 100% healthy, and then we'll work on an extension. Another thing that I want to talk about in terms of contracts. Now, I want to credit, of course, Jeff Darlington, who did tweet this out. The franchise tag in 2015 for a quarterback was $18.5 million. Now it's $32.4. The wide receiver franchise tag in 2015 was $12.8. It is now almost $20 million. The running back tag in 2015 was $10.9. It's now $10.1. It's less than it was almost 10 years ago. So it's gotten to a point where the running backs, it's being known league-wide that the running back position is the most replaceable. And you mentioned it. You tweeted it out. Joel V. Moran, give him a follow. Of all the champions of recent memory that have won a Super Bowl with running backs that are making, I think the most expensive player that led their team in rushing in their game was $2.8 million, and he wasn't even a running back. It was a receiver. It was Percy Harvin for the Seattle Seahawks. It just goes to show you that, yes, rushing is integral in the NFL for sure, but it does not hold king over passing. The quarterbacks rightfully make their money. And with quarterbacks comes receivers, because that's the next up in the hierarchy of who deserves the most amount of money next after quarterbacks. Running backs definitely are important, no doubt about it. And I feel like a lot of people do view this from a fantasy football aspect. And listen, I'm guilty of that too. But I have to take a step back and realize that a lot of these teams that are having success are with teams that are not paying top dollar to these running backs. It doesn't take away from how talented these guys are. These are the premier athletes of the world. Forget about just the NFL. These are amazing athletes. Saquon Barkley is one of the best athletes. Josh Jacobs really solidified himself as one of the best running backs in the game last season. More underrated for a couple of years, but last year really solidified himself. Tony Pollard, you've been talking about it for a couple of years, one of the more underappreciated running backs in the game. These guys are legit. Football players are some of the best athletes there are. It does not take away from that. It's just a matter of there needs to be a better way to construct these contracts with these running backs. It's what they're doing really, and I'm sorry I'm talking a lot here, and I'll move on really fast, but what they're doing with their rookie deals is they're abusing them. They're abusing these rookie contracts and running these running backs into the ground, and then at this point in time, they realize, hey, they're used goods. We don't need that anymore. We'll move on. The only thing that I could really think of that would maybe benefit running backs, and this can't happen for some time. I think you were telling me the CBA isn't going to be renewed until 2020. There you go. So the only thing that comes to mind is on a rookie contract, if you are a running back, you sign a 2-year deal. And maybe that might not be beneficial for some teams because, of course, they're trying to take advantage as much as they can with salary cap being as important as it is in the NFL. But that's the only quote-unquote fair thing I could think about for running backs. You sign them for a 2-year rookie deal. If you're like that, you get an extension for that 4 years while you're still in your prime, while you're not being overutilized. And that way we don't look at these contracts and think that these teams made terrible mistakes. I mean, you look at the very few that really have been beneficial for their team. Derrick Henry, of course. You mentioned it, CMC, but he was traded. I think of names like Nick Chubb, who's still on their team, but he was, of course, on a team-friendly deal. Alvin Kamara. Joe Mixon was able to go to a Super Bowl with him being given an extension as well. Aaron Jones is one of those that I look at and think that he obviously has performed very well, but the way that things have turned out now and in hindsight, are we looking at that signing as a great deal? Like, there, of course, we're going to look at it in history. There's going to be moments that you can pick and choose from, but there's just so much overwhelming information to go opposite of that it's hard to really stand where the running backs you can win while still paying them top dollar. It really hasn't been the case.
The biggest thing that's affecting this is just the evolution of football becoming more pass heavy.
For sure.
You're no longer using the run to set up the pass. You're passing the ball to set up the run. I look back to this 1999 trade, Ricky Williams, running back, a trade between the Saints and the Washington Commanders. The Saints traded, I think, a boatload of their first round pick, third round pick, fourth round pick, fifth round pick, their entire draft class to get this running back.
You should have just mentioned the Herschel Walker trade.
Herschel Walker trade was another big one.
Built an entire dynasty in Dallas.
Like, running backs used to be prioritized so much that teams are trading up for them and giving away multiple valuable assets to get these guys, and now it's not the case. We only see those type of trades for quarterbacks. Maybe it's just the trend, but the recent running back contracts is the reason why we're at the stalemate we are now, because Todd Gurley got his contract and just fell off a cliff. His knees gave out, and he just wasn't the same.
It's the hardest conversation to have with Todd Gurley because he's our generation's Bo Jackson. Of course, Bo Jackson's the better athlete, multi-sport athlete. But I think about it in terms of how dominant Todd Gurley was. Really just there was no one on his level. And then suddenly his knees just break down. He's nowhere near the player that he was. It really does break my heart because I understand where you're coming from, but it really was one of those things that it was out of his control.
And Ezekiel Elliott, who they signed him to a 6-year deal, and I'll be honest, they cut Zeke this offseason. They were about 2 years too late. I think Zeke, if you watch the Cowboys, you could have seen this 2 years ago that he wasn't the same player.
Ate some money on that too.
Yeah, they ate some money on that. And the worst thing is that this past season, Zeke actually had more touches overall than Pollard. And that's because they were paying him so much money that they had to just justify it, and they force-feeded Zeke. Le'Veon Bell, I think, is the worst example of it. I think he set back running backs a lot, and he tried to do it for a good cause. He sat out because he said, listen, the market isn't what I like. He ended up sitting out an entire year, got a deal from the Jets that was even less money than the Steelers initially offered him, and with the Jets, he was horrible. And then he bounces around teams. He goes to Kansas City. We're thinking there might be a revival, and he was just done. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't help that James Conner instantly matched his production the very year that he sat out. And the Steelers were fine when Le'Veon Bell left. So I think all of these deals in conjunction have been study cases for having case studies for the NFL to be like, listen, this all has happened in the past couple of years. And I think something similar happened with quarterback contracts not too long ago, when the Eagles paid Wentz and the Rams paid Goff, and they didn't make it through their contracts. They got traded, and then you started to see quarterbacks not getting paid as fast and frequently. Yep. There was a big stalemate between the Ravens and Lamar Jackson for some time. He's finally gotten paid. The biggest thing that's holding back running backs from getting money in the rookie deals is the rookie wage scale, because back then in the NFL, rookies were able to make whatever the team wanted them to make. You know, the Raiders, and it started with Jamarcus Russell because the Raiders paid Jamarcus Russell, I think, $60 million, and he just blew it. So that's what started this rookie wage scale. And it's not just running backs that are getting abused by the contracts. It's also quarterbacks. You know, Lamar Jackson, one of the best winning percentages since coming into the league, he was getting paid, I think, less than $10 million. Yep. So elite players on the rookie wage scale are going to look like they're getting exploited because they're outmatching what they're getting. They're outmatching their production.
Especially if you're not a first-round pick. Like, I think Dak, who's a fourth-round pick, like, he's making $1 million. And part of the issue, too, is the franchise tag, where Saquon has his, you know, his regular rookie wage scale, which is 4 years plus a team option for the 5th year. But then after that, you could basically franchise tag him for 2 more years. You franchise tag him the year 6, which is the average top 5 salaries. But then you could franchise tag him for year 7 and just a 20% increase of the previous season. So Saquon this year is making $10 million. If the Giants want to franchise tag him again next year, they'd just be paying $12 million. And in that case, you're 7 years into the league as a running back. If you're still elite at year 7, it's a rarity. So for the Giants, it's like, why am I going to, you know, guarantee all this money over 3-4 years when I could just franchise tag you back-to-back years? And the franchise tag's been something, you know, the NFLPA has been trying to negotiate out for years because it helps the team a ton and kind of screws the players for the most part. We saw Kirk Cousins get franchise tagged multiple times before he went to Minnesota. So it's not only the rookie wage scale, but it's also when you're a running back who's only making $10 million to the top 5 average, like you said, it's going down. You could get franchise tagged that second time where you usually don't see that at other positions, because if you get a 20% increase on a quarterback who's making $30 million, now you go from $30 million to paying him, you know, $36 million, right? So it's a bigger increase there.
Saquon, I think, deserved his money. This past season, he had a great season. The Giants are a little bit cautious because the past 2 seasons he's been injured, he's been hurt, hasn't played up to his level. Josh Jacobs is understandable to me, because this was his first real elite season of production. You know, outside of this season, he's kind of been a borderline 1,000-yard back and wasn't doing it on great efficiency. Tony Pollard, first real year as being the workhorse this upcoming season, hasn't been that up to this point. So I understand those deals. I just think it hurts morale a lot. I think back to the story of Max Crosby with Josh Jacobs. They were in the car together waiting at the deadline.
The story is terrible.
For him to get his contract extension, and it never came. I can only imagine the emotions that they went through. Max Crosby being super close to Josh Jacobs, hoping he gets his deal, and it never came. The franchise tag, as horrible as it is for the players, the only bright side about it is that it does guarantee you money for that entire year. So as long as you're on the franchise tag, you get that entire guaranteed money. Where
gotta show up though.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta show up. But like, if you're not like Saquon, there's rumors that him and Jacobs, you don't show up to these games, you're not going to get paid.
Yeah. So
holding out is, you're so right about Le'Veon Bell completely ruining the landscape for RBs in the future, because he sat out, and I was in support of Le'Veon Bell for sure. I was right there with him. I understood his cause. For him to come back and be bad. Not average, not but slightly below. He was bad.
Should have went to the Jets.
It laid the blueprint for future running backs that if they want to hold out, all owners have to do is look at that situation with Le'Veon Bell, say, hey, we see how this transpired. Do you really want part 2 of this? Do you want to be also a part of the history of running backs that tried to stand up and really could not end up on the other side and really show that running backs are worthwhile? You're just losing an extra year on your body. And in the NFL, time is so valuable and so precious that it's tough for these running backs. And it's going to get to a point where I really do think that the rookie contract for running backs will end up being drastically different, because it's to guys like Saquon, where they are the heart and soul of the offense, the heart and soul of the team. For him to not get his money is a slap in the face to him.